This was supposed to be a time for France to shine internationally and also domestically. And it could end up as though Emmanuel Macron may have messed up in terms of preventing the far right from getting into power or giving them a chance to be in power and then allow them to mess it up. He could also find himself being blamed for one of the biggest crises that France has faced since the start of the Fifth Republic back in the late 1950s.
Now, Zaz, we head over to France because voters in France are going to be heading to the polls tomorrow for the first of two rounds to elect a new government. And if the polls are to be believed, Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party are heading for victory. Well, let's welcome Nina dos Santos, international broadcaster and former Europe editor at CNN. Nina, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Alexis.
What are the latest polls telling us, Nina?
Well, we just had the last set of polls published over the last 24 hours, and I have to say they're not looking good either for Emmanuel Macron or for the relationship that France has at the core of the EU. That could have big implications for helping Ukraine defend itself against the Russian invasion, or indeed absorbing Ukraine into the broader EU in years to come. It's looking as though, according to three polls, Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party is still in the lead, may well even get enough votes if it can form alliances with other parties to form a majority. Having said that, just a note of caution I should throw to the wind here, Alexis. It's that IFOP, the more official polling agency in France, has had one of its polls published by Le Figaro, the newspaper over there. This is often viewed as slightly more reliable type of poll, and that indicates that we could still be facing a hung parliament for France, not just at the first round of voting, but at the second one too, when all this is done.
Nina, some people said when the election was called that actually in some sort of bluff stroke double bluffed way, President Macron wanted to almost get Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party in government in order to perhaps expose what he feels are people who are not ready for government, and that all to be done before the next presidential election. Might he get his wish in that case, or how difficult will it be to govern when you have the president and the government not seeing eye to eye?
It's looking very, very difficult. And also there's another scenario here that we have to contend with, and that is that, as I was saying before, Alexis, that France may end up with no party forming a majority, and the National Rally essentially have called Emmanuel Macron's bluff here. They've said, well, look, if we can't get a majority and we can't get other people to govern with us, let's just have some sort of unstable national unity government that'll plod along for the next year. And that'll leave Emmanuel Macron looking really bad because he can't call another snap legislative election for another year as per the rules. So that could leave France in disarray at a time when obviously the eyes of the world are looking at France over the next few months because it's going to be hosting the Olympic Games. This was supposed to be a time for France to shine internationally and also domestically. And it could end up as though Emmanuel Macron may have messed up in terms of preventing the far right from getting into power or giving them a chance to be in power and then allow them to mess it up. He could also find himself being blamed for one of the biggest crises that France has faced since the start of the Fifth Republic back in the late 1950s. Either way, though, the polls still show Emmanuel Macron's own party is still languishing in third position behind not just the left, who are on sort of 25%, but again, as I was saying before, the National Rally that has just continued to cement its lead in these polls, just one day ahead of that first round.
And Nina, talk us through how much we'll know after this first round, because for people unfamiliar with how this process will work, the first round will tell us enough, do we think, to predict what's happening on the second round? Or are we going to see the second round people who really don't want to see the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, take any form of power, rallying behind this sort of coalition of the left in the second round?
Alexis, at this point, that is the trillion-dollar question. In France, previously, what has happened, very often less at sort of legislative elections, but at the more important presidential elections, that, by the way, usually come sort of in close timing with presidential elections. This is an unusual scenario here that we have a snap election about 3 years before a presidential election. So it's completely out of kilter timing-wise, also politically, if you like. So we're into uncharted territory, but usually the French electorate have their protest vote on the first round and then famously sort of back off on the second round. Essentially, over the next few days, what's going to happen is that all of these many different candidates that are on the ballot sheet for French voters tomorrow are going to start forming alliances to whittle those numbers down into, you know, a 2-3-way contest over the next week or so. And that's when we'll have a broader idea of sort of who's managing to form more concrete alliances with whom and who the voters are likely to pivot towards. But as I was saying before, you look at those polls that are not just looking at the first round, they're also looking at the second round, and they still seem to appear to indicate the support for Jordan Bardella and Marine Le Pen's party, far-right party, the National Rally, isn't waning even on the second round of voting. That'll, of course, be a big concern, not just for France and Emmanuel Macron, but obviously for the Eurozone, the central bank, because remember that France is a huge economy inside the single currency, and also for Brussels, just a couple of days after, of course, they agreed to keep Ursula von der Leyen at the helm of the European Commission.
Nina, just before we go, we've also got, as you said, the Olympics are about to start, but we've also got the Euros, France doing rather well. They're in the last 16. And we saw sort of what might call an unusual intervention from the captain of France, one of the national heroes when it comes to football, possibly one of the best footballers on the planet at the moment. Mbappe came out in an interview saying that young people need to go out and vote and encourage them to vote against racism and division in the country. Is that going to have any sort of significance in these first two rounds of voting?
We don't know, but I suspect that among people who are sympathetic to his message, youngsters who very often, you know, might be first or second generation from Francophone African heritage, or youngsters who like football a lot, who feel very keenly about the French team, it might well have an impact. Essentially, what you've got here is Kylian Mbappe sort of pushing back on Jordan Bardella's courting of the youth vote. He's been very successful, the new leader of the National Rally, in courting children and young adults who've just left school. This is their first chance that they can vote in any European elections, now legislative elections and future presidential elections. And what he's tried to do is use social media, with aplomb, by the way, to try and get hold of that cohort and make them loyal future supporters of his political movement. And people like Kylian Mbappe are saying, don't be seduced by this particular message. You know, these are still the same people in the same party who have been accused of Islamophobia in the past, of xenophobia, and also much worse. But I've got to say, Kylian Mbappe's message was a bit more discreet than some of his other French teammates. There were other ones who said outright, do not vote for the National Rally, for this party. Mbappe himself just said, essentially, don't vote for political extremes. Now, what has Jordan Bardella had to say about that? Well, he's repeatedly dismissed that.